local history, local culture, local events, your community. This is the Joe Kelly Show.
Hi there, everybody. We're in the Hamilton College Chapel, and the chapel is what we're going to be talking about today. The chapel and the cemetery will take you there as well. We're going to be talking to Christian Goodwillie. Christian is the curator and director of special collections here at Hamilton, and we'll also be talking to Fred Rogers, who is director of gift planning. Both of them know a lot about this chapel and a lot about the history at Hamilton College, and we'll be talking to them right after this. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. The aforementioned Fred Rogers is with us. We're going to be talking to him about a variety of things, including this building and the cemetery that's not too far from this building. But before we do that, we're going to say thanks for having us in.
You're welcome, Joe.
What a historic building. It dates back to 1827. And was it the first building on the Hamilton College campus?
Not the first, actually the third or fourth, depending on how you count completed buildings. But there was Buttrick Hall from 1810, where our president has his office now. I want to say 1820, next door, Kirkland Hall, a residence. And then North Hall, or called Dexter in those days, started in 1824, but not completed until 1842. So in comes the chapel in 1827.
What about the Samuel Kirkland's house?
Yes, well, that's just over the other direction. Beautifully restored, by the way, in the last couple of years. 1792 has had three locations, interestingly. Down the hill, was brought up here next to the cemetery at some point in the 1800s, and then moved next to Buttrick Hall, the president's office.
And for those that don't know their history as you do, who was Samuel Kirkland?
Well, Samuel Kirkland was our founder. He was a humble Presbyterian missionary trained by Eleazar Wheelock, the founder of Dartmouth College. Interestingly, Hamilton and Dartmouth have very similar origin stories as what we would call today multicultural educational project to educate white settler children and Native American children together. Both failed in that objective, but in any rate, Kirkland came here to this howling wilderness of the Mohawk Valley to missionize the Seneca Indians first, and then later the Oneida Indians. And that was when he hatched his educational plan, dated 1791, to create an academy on this hilltop to educate children.
What a great place to put a college on top of this hill, huh?
Well, we'd call it the commanding heights, I suppose, in another context, but with the growth of vegetation, it obscures what was once a glorious, clear view down into the Oriskany Valley. I mean, this really was, in fact, this chapel could be seen from the village of Clinton, and in fact, its bell heard. In those days. It's a little more obscured with trees and so forth now.
You talk about the bell, and I'm remembering some history that I read that at one time you had students ringing this bell, yes?
Yes, until 1950 when an IBM automatic ringer came in. But yeah, it was a grand tradition, mid-century Hamilton and earlier. Students lived in the upstairs here, and that was their job, was to ring the bell.
They actually slept up there?
They slept there, and there's handwriting on the wall to prove it.
If we were to, and we're not going to, but if we were to go up as far as we could up into the steeple, what would we see?
Well, I imagine what we'd see is a lot of new timbers, because we've just completed, as of the fall of 2021, a major structural renovation to the chapel tower. and a lot of the original timbers had to be replaced. So we'd see a lot of new wood that was reconstructed as close to the original design as possible, and we might see the handwriting on the wall from where I think we put a piece of glass over it to preserve the VE Day exclamations that were written on the wall.
When that was taken down, I mean, they had a crane. I've seen a picture of it. They had a crane lift that off, didn't they?
I call it the beheading of the chapel, because the work was so extensive they needed to work on it on the ground as opposed to on scaffolding. So yeah, it was sitting next to the chapel on the grass for quite a while.
Did they change the colors a little bit when they took the
They did, and I'm hoping that my colleague Christian Goodwillie, whom we'll speak with in a bit, can maybe talk about the colors.
Okay.
But we did restore them. There was something like 14 coats of paint on the bell tower, and they believe that they discovered that the original, I think it's a green hue that was detected.
How close is the building now? I know it's gone through, we talked before the show about some of the development of this chapel. It didn't always look like this.
Well, actually, what you see here now is probably pretty close to its original construction as a plain New England Protestant chapel. No stained glass, no religious iconography, straight-backed pews, white walls, etc. It went through several changes, notably starting in 1897 when this became a Victorian chapel with, believe it or not, above your head, a massive Romanesque stone arch and golden oak throughout. It was very dark. So this has had some incarnations, but in 1948 to 1950, the current renovation was undertaken and bringing it back to its original, as close to its original look as possible.
I'm just going to skim to something else quickly. Out front, there is a statue.
Yes.
Of
Alexander Hamilton.
And his connection with the college is?
He was a trustee of Hamilton College. It's not known that he ever set foot in the Mohawk Valley, but through Samuel Kirkland's connections with George Washington and his service to the colonial army, he had a connection to Alexander Hamilton and invited him to be a trustee of his Hamilton Oneida Academy and later named Hamilton College.
And up on the very tip top of the building, there is a weather vane.
There is, a very special one.
Talk about that.
Well, this building, in addition to being historic, is also iconic, and both for its beauty and its centrality on our campus, but because atop the cupola, atop the dome actually, is a quill. And Hamilton College has been famed for generations for teaching students to write and to speak with alacrity and vigor, and so that quill symbolizes the arts of communication that have been the core of the Hamilton curriculum since the 1840s, really.
Speaking of communication, you've had in this building, you've had a lot of speakers. This, in addition to being a chapel, serves other purposes.
Absolutely.
And one of the purposes as a venue for speakers to come in here.
We've had a number.
Talk about olden day speakers.
Well, olden days, I think the most important speaker who no doubt spoke here in the 1800s would have been our alumnus, class of 1878, the marvelously named James Schoolcraft Sherman, a Utica native, I believe, but
That's
certainly
right,
a resident, who became William Howard Taft's vice president. And so surely he, I want to say he was also a trustee at some point, and so would have come and spoken here. Our alumnus in the class of 1864, Elihu Root, who went on to be the Secretary of State for Teddy Roosevelt and Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1912, among many other distinctions, surely spoke here many, many times. If you want to fast forward, 1939, Ezra Pound, our alumnus, the great poet, our alumnus, class of 1905, was invited back in 1939 to revisit his old college, about which he had some ambivalence, shall we say. But he gave an address here on this stage with a journalist by the name of V.I. Kaltenborn, who took it upon himself to criticize Pound for his proto-fascist leanings.
During the interview?
Yeah, during the speaking engagement, because they were both on the podium to speak to students. 10 years later, 1949, Norman Thomas, the perennial socialist candidate for President of the United States. 1966 was a busy year. We had Robert F. Kennedy speak, and Simon and Garfunkel performed from this stage. Now, I have to go back to Robert F. Kennedy. I don't know that it's unique to Hamilton, but there has been an age-old tradition of showing your approval in chapel or other gathering places on this campus, not by clapping, but by snapping your fingers. And at some point in his address, students began to snap their fingers for Robert F. Kennedy, and apparently he stopped and looked around and said, "What the heck was that?"
Yeah. How did that? Do you know how that tradition got started?
I don't know how it started, and maybe Christian does, but
Right.
I think it was perhaps Hamilton trying to be unique or distinct in some way. But still today, alumni, particularly of the 60s and 70s, like to snap their fingers.
That would take me aback too if I didn't know it was coming, right? Modern day.
Let's see. Ralph Nader in 2004. 2018, our alumnus in the class of 1980, Mark Randolph, the founder or a founder of Netflix, also a current trustee of the college, came to speak. So that's
Was
a bit of a
Hillary
catalog.
Clinton, did Hillary Clinton speak here?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
I have not, but I'll tell you who did. G. Gordon Liddy in
I remember that.
1981.
Yeah.
So,
What kind of reception did he get?
well, I wasn't here, but I imagine. Well, in 1967, let's go back to '67 when George Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party, spoke here, and the students stood up and turned their backs on him for the duration of his address. So I don't know whether Liddy got that reception or not, but
No clicking of the fingers.
no, I probably very little clicking.
You are an authority on the cemetery that is here, and in fact, it's a short walk from where we're sitting right now, correct?
Yes.
And how did that cemetery get started?
Well, it's an interesting story. In 1820, just mind you, 8 years after Hamilton was chartered by the state of New York, in 1820 the board voted to establish a cemetery on this hilltop. And to me that's a remarkable vote of confidence in an 8-year-old college that it said we are going to have worthies whom we will want to remember and honor on our hilltop. And so that's when it started, 1820. Burials, I don't believe, began until the 1830s. In those days, all of Hamilton's early professors and trustees and so forth, presidents, were buried down in the village and later exhumed and brought up to College Hill.
Some of the people that are buried at the Hamilton College Cemetery.
Well, notably, not just the aforementioned Elihu Root, but I think the entire Root family, all 36 of them, are buried here. Sort of the first family of Hamilton, I think we could say. We have a young woman who died young, Carolyn Catlin Munson, who married Samuel P. Munson, I believe, of that Utica family. Gorgeous Victorian monument that we can take a look at if you'd like. We have Alexander Woolcott. Probably the second, after Elihu Root, probably the second most famous Hamilton alumnus, New York cultural and literary and cultural critic for the New York Times, and had his own radio show. He is buried here after some shenanigans. Duncan Campbell Lee is a Hamilton alumnus who asked that his heart organ be buried on College Hill. His body is in England.
So it was done?
It was done, August 1945.
My heart wants to go on, but we're out of time.
All right, thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you for coming in, and you've got a great place to work. When we come back, we're going to be talking to somebody who knows as much as you. Is that a fair statement?
Probably more.
All right. We're going to be talking to Christian Goodwillie right after this short break. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Well, we're joined by the aforementioned Christian Goodwillie. Christian, I was talking earlier about the changes that have taken place in the chapel. One of the changes is the pews, correct?
Correct, yes.
How did it start out?
So this building, interestingly, the sanctuary was originally only the 2/3 of the space we're in to the east. And behind it were actually 2 classrooms for studying physics and Greek. So in that old sanctuary, there were straight back chairs, bare wooden floors, a very weak stove that apparently left it rather chilly in here, and the minister spoke from what was described as a bare box pulpit. So just a very primitive kind of frontier thing. So no benches to begin with.
And wasn't there a chemistry classroom or something down cellar?
Yes, there was a chemistry lab, and then because the building had an entire 3rd floor above the 2-story sanctuary, there was also a library up there and meeting spaces for some of the academic societies like the Phoenix and Philippian societies.
You mentioned the 3rd floor. That's very unusual, is it not, for a church of this design to have 3 floors?
Apparently it is, yeah. There's one other documented example that was built in Guilford, Connecticut around 1713, so very early, but was torn down as early as 1828. So as far as we know, we're one of the very few, if not the only one.
We didn't talk about the bell with Fred too much. The bell, the clock, very symbolic, very iconic to this college.
Yeah, the original bell for the chapel was apparently a very weak sounding bell, described as sounding like a fur cap with a lamb's tail striking it. And this was used by some of the boys as an excuse to not make 6 a.m. chapel, that they didn't hear the bell. Eventually that bell was replaced by a very high quality Manili bell from the famous foundry in Troy, New York. And then subsequently there was another bell that ended up cracking only 2 years after it was installed, and the current bell was installed in 1902.
You were making notes when we were talking with Fred earlier about some of the other speakers that have been here.
Yeah, so quite an impressive array of people. Along with the ones that Fred mentioned, we've had Angela Davis, of course the famous activist, our own alum Robert Bob Moses, who recently passed away, another very famous civil rights activist. A group of the Navajo Code Talkers from World War II actually spoke here, along with Susan Sontag and Margaret Atwood.
In addition to speakers, you do weddings here, do you not?
Well, yes, actually, because I attended one. I was trying to think.
Yeah.
I knew we did, but I don't know much about it other than I did attend one that was held here, which was really nice.
Yeah. The history of the college, I don't know, you go, I don't know how many colleges you can go back to. Not that many that have got the history that Hamilton does. Must be nice to be in that environment.
It really is, and I have to say, I moved to this area from a living history museum, a Shaker Museum in Western Massachusetts, and I really lamented that I was going to leave that historic built environment every day. But then I saw the Hamilton Hilltop, and I was like, well, it's the same thing, you know?
You know, there's something when you come up the hill, there's a stone shelter. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
What was that put there for, do you know?
It's a memorial to a young man that was put up by his father. Fred could correct the date, but I want to say in the 1880s sometime. And it is used as a shelter, you know, halfway up the hill.
Yeah. The time that is spent here, these are young people that, I almost said kids, young people that come for a Bachelor of Arts degree, yes?
Yes. Yeah, all kinds of different undergraduate majors, yes.
And I see kids, young people walking around the campus today. Are these people that are thinking about coming here in the fall?
Oh gosh, yeah, every day. Our admissions parking lot is full, and there's tours are constantly going around the campus.
And talk about some of these resident halls that are on the quad. Boy, those are...
Yeah, so we're very lucky that we have, in essence, kind of the original composition of the campus intact here, only lacking the Hamilton Oneida Academy building, 1794, which was torn down in 1828. But we've got our 2 dorms to the south of us, to the north of us, The northernmost is the oldest dorm on this campus, dating from the 1820s. And one thing that I like to always point out as well is we had a building early on called Hamilton Hall, and named in honor, of course, of Alexander Hamilton, that featured a gilt eagle on the parapet as well as a wooden bust of Alexander Hamilton. That was built 1817. It didn't last very long, but on the tower of this chapel, there's two beautiful decorative wooden swags. Those were salvaged from Hamilton Hall, and Hooker incorporated them into the facade of the chapel. And the guys that did the work here in 2021 were amazed at the condition of the wood of those swags. Just perfect condition.
I don't think we mentioned Philip Hooker when I was talking to Fred. Really a well-known, prominent, famous architect, yeah?
Yeah, Philip Hooker is one of the most important early American architects, right up there with Benjamin Latrobe and Charles Bulfinch. He was based in Albany. He was also involved in politics. He was a prominent Freemason, which was a very powerful social religious movement at the time in New York, and designed the original New York State Capitol, as well as Albany City Hall, Albany Academy, and a number of famous houses, including Hyde Hall, which is open as a museum today.
Down near Cooperstown.
Yes.
Yeah. The locals also had a role in building this chapel, did they not?
Yeah, they did. So it was Hamilton trustee John Lothrop of Utica designed the actual interior of the building, all of the mass behind Hooker's facade for the tower. The stone for the building was quarried in Whitestown. It's our local Oriskany limestone by a guy named Reuben Wilcox. And people that walk around our campus will see that it mellows to this beautiful brownish orange because of the iron oxide in the limestone.
You know, I'm looking at the pews while you're talking, and you know what I'm reminded of? I'm reminded of being in the Old North Church in Boston.
Yes.
Similar?
Yeah, it is because of the colonial revival style restoration that was undertaken just after World War II in the building. But originally, there were straight back chairs in this sanctuary. Yeah. Down in town, they had box pews in the meeting house.
I'm looking back over your shoulder at the plaques on the wall. Is the chapel dedicated to students here, alumnus who lost their lives in World War II?
There are memorials to students that lost their lives in many different wars in American history in the chapel.
The time that students spend here is not regulated like it once was, right?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, we have various faith traditions represented on campus. We have rabbi who comes in on a part-time basis, an imam. There's typically a college chaplain. And on the third floor, where the library and society club rooms used to be, is an area called the Coop. And there's a very large library of books on all religious traditions up there. And there's meditation sessions and all kinds of things happen there.
I've got to believe the building that opened, did it open or did construction start?
1827?
Yeah.
I think they started using it in 29, if I remember right, yeah.
Well, a building that dates back that far, I got to believe, is on the National Historic Register?
Yeah, I believe this is a National Historic Landmark.
And does that create benefits by being a National Historic Landmark?
It kind of varies. What it does is it usually puts protections in terms of what you can do to the structure, what you can do to the facade, fenestration, but no, not really too much in the way of like financial benefits.
Yeah, somebody told me once that it creates sometimes more problems than it because you can't do a lot of things you might want to do.
Yeah, for a private homeowner, that's certainly the case. It can be a negative, yeah.
The time that you spend here, are you still finding things that you didn't know in the history of this chapel and this campus?
Oh, all the time, yeah. I've been here for 14 years, and it's remarkable what's come to light, what's come out of the ground. We expanded Campus Drive about 5-6 years ago now, and the workmen hit a time capsule that had been located under one of the class boulders, which had since been moved, but they didn't know a time capsule was under it. And these guys were great. They stopped their work and they brought it right to the library, and we later had a big event where we opened it. And
what was in it?
A lot of ephemera, a little tin horn, you know, like a kind of a fraternity horn, a beanie, a little felt beanie, and I believe some newspapers from when it was buried.
You were mentioning the classrooms, library, all the things that used to be in here. Besides the chapel now, what's in here?
Well, the coop, as I mentioned, on the 3rd floor is really the main other use for this space.
Classrooms anymore?
No, although there are some educational activities that happen up in the coop.
And the library is moved to?
The library is over at the north end of the campus in the 1972 Burke Library, which is actually its 4th location on this campus.
The library isn't here anymore. Where is the library now?
Correct, yeah. It's in a building that was built in 1972 at the north end of this quad called the Burke Library, which is actually the 4th location of the library in the college's history.
Why is it moving around so much?
I think as the collection expanded, we had a purpose-built library built in the 1860s, which is now a dorm. Then we had our 1912 James Library, which is now classrooms, and then 72, we've got almost 700,000 volumes in there. So.
Do you know if there's a time capsule in this building, a Cornerstone?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. The time that is spent by students here, is it more religious now, or is it more community?
In this building?
Yeah.
You know, I honestly couldn't answer that
Okay.
because I'm not a participant in the religious life of the campus.
Okay.
I know there certainly are services in here, but nothing like it, of course, was in the 1830s.
Right. The Samuel Kirkland Cottage,
Yeah.
that's been moved
Yes.
as well.
A number of times.
Yeah, and the reason for that moving is?
Well, he originally built it down at the bottom of the hill as a makeshift dwelling. It was later used as a blacksmith shop in town. Then it was moved up to near the cemetery. And then eventually it found its final home in the 1920s next to Buttrick Hall.
Is that ever open to the public?
It can be open anytime someone comes into the president's office and requests the key.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. That's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. We'll do it all again. Don't forget cnyhomepage.com. There's a lot of good stuff there. Until next time, take care of yourself, everybody.